Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Abdullah Samir Show. I am joined by two wonderful young men today, friends, very good friends, Younas and Ibraheem, not the real names. We're using pen names for privacy reasons. Younas grew up in West Africa in a small town where everybody memorized the Quran. And when I say everybody, I mean this was like the norm. And he's going to go into more detail as to how exactly this happened. So Younas grew up in West Africa in a small town, like I said. He came to America. He had to start from scratch, not only learning the language, but just basic skills, because all he was doing was Quran, Quran, Quran. Eventually, he overcame all this, got into a successful program at university, and he's studying the field of basically what he wanted to study. And the amazing twist in this story is how he got his best friend, Ibrahim, and he was talking to his best friend, and both of them ended up leaving Islam, which is so amazing. I mean, you rarely hear that happening. Usually it's the opposite. Usually, one person leaves Islam, maybe the husband, and there's a wife that doesn't want to leave Islam, or, friends leave you. To maintain a friendship after leaving Islam is just amazing. It's very great. Younas, how's it going?
Hey, Abdullah Samir, thanks for having me. So glad to come in and just talk to everybody about this. So we'll see how it goes. But yeah, so my name is Younas, and I left Islam about, I want to say, almost 5-6 years ago now. And now I am just studying at a university as a scientist. So I'm working on my doctorate in embryology. So we can go into that a little bit as well if you guys would like.
Nice.
But yeah, so I'm here today, and I brought my friend Ibrahim, and we're gonna just share our stories with you guys and just sort of journey we went through and how we got to where we are now.
Awesome. Ibrahim, how's it going?
Good. How are you? Thanks for also having me, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Awesome. Yeah, so we didn't introduce you yet. You are from North Africa as well. Both of you are American, and it's interesting. So you're a native Arabic speaker as well in this case.
Yeah, I am.
Okay.
I speak Arabic as my first language, and then I learned English later on.
Okay, beautiful. So here we have two different people from different parts of the world. Mm-hmm. Both of them only connected, I would say, to Islam and friendship, and then the friendship stayed, Islam didn't stay. So this is awesome. I'm so excited about this. So Younas, let's go back to the very beginning.
Yeah.
Let's go back to when you let's go back to your hometown. Tell us about what it's like growing up over there and your family situation.
Yep, sure. So I grew up in West Africa in a very tiny town where it was the norm for people to just memorize the Quran. As a kid, as a 5-year-old kid, instead of going to, elementary school, you'd go to elementary Quranic school, and you'd learn the Arabic alphabet. You'd learn how to pronounce all the sounds and things like that. Now, you don't know how to, you don't understand Arabic, you don't know what it means, but you're just learning how to read it, essentially. And so that's what I did when I was 5. I just started doing that. Learning all of the alphabet, learning how to read, and then eventually started memorizing entire chapters of the Quran, and be able to recite them. Like, the teacher would sit down, and you would sit down and with your teacher, and you'd recite, and they'll say, recite this chapter, and you would have to do it. And it's done in a way where, believe it or not, right now the government there is actually starting to crack down on these schools because they're so severe. Like, they beat you if you don't memorize it and stuff like that. I mean, it's very backwards the way they do it.
Oh, wow. How much did you end up memorizing of the Quran?
Oh, yeah, I ended up memorizing more than half. So I ended up memorizing more than half. So quite a bit before I came here. And the reason I came here, and I actually came here when I was a teenager, and the reason I came here was that so I could go to school. So there, I didn't go to school at all. Like,
Wow.
I just did not learn anything that you would consider education. Like, I was just learning the Quran only.
So you was telling me that there's something interesting that people do. They leave the country and they leave. So you were actually with just one parent, right? And your other parent was in the US.
Yeah. So yeah, that's a common practice where people will leave their kid at a Quranic school for years to just learn the Quran, and they won't see their parents for years at a time. And that's what happened to me. I actually didn't get to see my dad until I was like 8, and didn't see my mom until I was like a teenager, basically, like after coming here.
Wow.
And that's very common. That's not even seen as weird or anything like that.
And why do they do that?
It's just the fact that you're learning the Quran is priority. So they put that at the top of the list. You have to be raised like with the Quran. That's the idea. So if you're not raised with the Quran, then you're not a disciplined child. You're not really a child that they would be proud to, say that this is my son, and stuff like that. So this is just something they did as sort of to even be a regular human being. It's very weird. Yeah, so that happened to me, but eventually I did find my way into the US. So now I guess I'll go on to talk about my journey afterwards. So once I came to America, I didn't speak any English, so I had to learn that. And that took me a little bit. It actually didn't take me that long. I was relatively young when I came here, and I was surrounded by it. Like, it just, no one really spoke English here. Like my native language.
Yeah.
So I was forced to learn English very quickly, learn how to read, learn how to write. But because I didn't have any prior formal education at all, I had to start from the very basics. So I had to start from learning things like basic addition, subtraction, multiplication. I had to learn, just very basic stuff that people, most people learn when they're in first, second, third, elementary school. I had to start with that as a teenager. But thankfully, I was able to catch up fairly quickly and, graduated high school and then went into college. And high school is actually where I met Ibrahim, and we'll go into that in a little bit. But this whole point, I was Muslim. Okay, so I believed in the religion like wholeheartedly. I had no doubts in my mind whatsoever. And when I was in my mid-teens, like around 16, 17, I became very religious. I just took a nosedive into religion because I started to think, if this is true, the consequences here are dire, right? So I became enamored with the idea of the afterlife. I became just absolutely entrenched with Islam. I was reading the Quran like all the time, and this time I was reading it in English so I could actually understand it, right? Reading translations and stuff like that for the first time, right? So I could actually get what it means and things like that. And at the time, I didn't have any doubts. It was profound for me to be like, wow, I'm reading God's words. This is absolutely amazing, right? And I became.
So they never ever taught you the actual like things?
No, they don't. Well, okay, they would eventually if I stayed there. Okay. If I stayed there, eventually, once you memorize everything, they teach you what it means. But that takes years, even. So.
Wow.
Yeah. So
because I guess according to them, it's already part of the culture there. Like the stuff you do, you say Bismillah or whatever, and they're like they don't think. They just take it for granted that this is the Muslim way, and we don't need to like explicitly.
Exactly.
I guess.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I'll go into the history a little bit and like how Islam got there and stuff like that actually, but because that actually plays into what eventually made me leave. Okay, so became super religious, was praying all the time. Was just I was on the right path, right? And then when I graduated high school, I started college a little bit, and then I started to get into science. Okay, so I started to consume a lot of science content. Just started following science news. Started learning about the Earth's past. Started learning about stars and the universe and things of that sort. So this was just like when I began college, right? So I was just doing this like on my off time. This was just something I was just kind of interested in. I didn't know I was interested in science, but apparently I was, because I was just looking into it. And this was kind of the beginning, right? So this was the beginning. But it wasn't the end all be all. Okay, for the most part, I still believed. I still followed everything, the way it goes. But
so you at this point there was no cognitive dissonance yet.
There was no cognitive dissonance yet. In fact, I started to watch people like Zakir Naik and Ahmed Didat, because these apologists, they talk about how there's scientific miracles in the Quran, right? And things of that sort. So I used to consume that type of content, and that made me believe in. I was like, wow, I just got interested in science, and turns out Islam is actually scientific, right? And this is because, well, I didn't quite know enough science to really be able to judge this or not yet. But at the time, this was impressive for me, right? And so I continued that, and it was just super profound for me. But then one time I remember, I think this was in 2014 when I took my first chemistry class in college. And I was learning about atoms, and once again, like, I had no concept of this whatsoever. The education here in America is, the public education here is not that great. They don't teach you that much about science, to be honest. So I didn't know about atoms and chemistry. And when I took my first chemistry class, like, it almost opened up my perspective a little bit more. I was like, wow, this is amazing. Is this how our world actually works? Like, these chemical reactions are happening in my body right now. That is just profound. Like, this is just amazing, right? And everything was about measurement and preciseness and how the scientific method works. And I began to think, I was like, wait a minute, like, the Quran that's claimed to be in the science, or the science that's claimed to be in the Quran is not like that. It's not that precise. It's very vague. It's not robust as of what I was learning in class, right? So that was kind of the beginning. But here is kind of where things really began to shake up for me. So I remember one morning, I woke up to pray Fajr, right? And I was in the middle of the prayer, and I started to think. I was like, why does God require me to perform these odd movements in order to be right with him? Like, why does he need people to do these sort of things and rituals for him to save them from hell? Like, it was odd for me. It was like, God is so grand. He's so great. Why these petty things, But that was just questions in my mind. Like, I didn't start really doubting, right?
So that was the first little hole in the canopy that the light started to come in.
Exactly. So it was these little things that started to kind of come up in my mind, and started make me wonder. But I continued to just sat there and think about, and then later I started to think about, like, why does God even burn anyone? Like, why would you want to burn anyone? Like, even the worst person in the world, burning for all eternity? Like, what is the purpose of that? Like, what would that even do? Like, is that going to teach them a lesson? No, because they're never going to be saved from it. So it's not like they're going to learn anything, right?
Yeah.
So, like, what's the point? I don't understand. I just didn't get it. So these questions started to come up in my mind, right?
And it's usually, it's even worse than that. It's not for the worst people. It's for non-Muslims. It's for disbelievers.
Yeah.
Whether or not they're good people, it's just disbelievers are going to hell forever. Muslims maybe for some time, but disbelievers will go to hell no matter how good they are. Bill Gates, all of them who know Islam and reject it will go to hell.
Yes, who knowingly reject it. That's what they say. But yeah, so these things started to come up in my mind, and I remember I remember to this day the first time I realized that I was actually doubting. I was like, wow, I became mentally, for the first time, it was conscious in my mind. It was mental. I was mentally aware that I was actually doubting. And then I prayed to God that these doubts went away. So I started to, just hold on even like harder. I just started reading more and things like that. But it didn't help. Like the more I read, because I was getting into science and had this new way of thinking, this sort of more rational way of approaching things, it became very difficult for me. And later I remember certain verses in the Quran that would say things like, do you not think, or do you not reflect on these things and stuff like that. And people always say that Quran actually encourages doubt and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I kind of bought into that. I was like, okay, fine, all right, let's look into this then. So I started to sort of I gave myself permission to be able to actually look at it rationally for the first time, instead of just reading the Quran and just becoming enamored with a profound word of God. I started to really look at it in a sort of not quite yet skeptical point of view, but more rational, just more relaxed, open-minded sort of mindset, right? But I find myself, consuming a lot of science and a lot of scientific thinking in general. And so suddenly I was able to scrutinize and see the flaws in the arguments and these apologists that I used to listen to. Now they don't impress me anymore as much. I'm like, wow, I see how fallacious their arguments are, and frankly, how unscientific they are even, So
Yeah.
you can just imagine all of this culminating, and my faith just stood on shakier and shakier ground, right? And then I remember one night I was like, I don't know if I actually believe it. Genuinely believe. Okay. I don't actually know if I'm convinced that if this is true or not. Okay. And the main reason for this was just because I learned more about how the real world works, and more about, reading the Quran and going, like, when you read verses that talk about sheep and camels and, shackles of silver, like all of these very ancient, very outdated ways of thinking, a very, like, when I read the Quran describe the world, it's geocentric. It's like
Yeah.
it's like very primitive. I was like, man, we are so beyond this. Like, why is the Quran talking? This is the word from God. Like, why is it even like this? Why does it seem like it's man-made, frankly? Okay.
What you're saying
Yeah.
is precisely what happened to me. Precisely what happened to me.
Wow.
I became scientifically literate. I mean, nowhere near to where you are, because I went down the technology route.
Sure.
But like in my spare time, I'm reading about science articles, and as I gained knowledge, I started to look at the Quran and be like, this is weird. And eventually, but like, wow, like what, like this is impressive.
I was shocked. Like, so my field is biology, right? So I was shocked to learn how Islam actually doesn't align with evolution. For example, this is one huge. I mean, this was the straw that kind of broke the camel's back for me in a lot of ways, because I was thinking about the story of Adam. Like, according to Islam, how humans originated is very different from like what we actually know. Okay, it's very different from what we actually know from like data and looking at like real stuff, right? It's very different from the stories. And getting into biology and learning a little bit more, I was like, oh my God, like this is obviously a fairy tale. It is a story that is told, and it's not even, Islam didn't even invent it. That's the thing. Christianity didn't even invent it. I mean, Adam and Eve, these stories were around ages before, and they were just changed and incorporated as people move to different civilizations and culture builds on. These stories just change over time, and eventually we're left with this product, right? With this product of having Adam and Eve that really came from years and years of iteration of the same story, right? Like addition and iteration of the same story.
Yeah.
I mean, there is no scientific thing to it at all. There is no scientific anything to it at all. And this was one major thing for me.
Mm.
That kind of like once I learned this, because when you listen to Zakir Naik, I mean, he doesn't believe in evolution. He's a medical doctor.
Yeah.
Apparently.
What is that? Right?
He doesn't believe in like if you don't accept the science of evolution and you're a medical doctor, like I don't know what to tell you. It's just you haven't opened your mind up. Let me now go into how I met Ibraheem and how he plays into this whole journey. But as I kind of alluded to earlier, we met in high school. We actually went through the same high school together and stuff like that. And we became close friends. We were both Muslim at the time. There was a certain time. There was a period where I wasn't Muslim. Like I had already left Islam, but kept it under wraps with him. Like I didn't tell him at first. So me and him would go praying together still. If I would go over to his house, we would pray together. We would go pray Jummah sometimes together and stuff like that. But I didn't believe, but I didn't tell him. But he did notice. I think he'll tell you, and I'll let him share his view, what he was thinking at the time. But I think he might have noticed certain things about me that he just didn't. He never connected two and two. Because look, when you're in Islam, it's sometimes it's almost impossible. At least that was in my case. It's impossible to even think that it's possible to leave it. Like that possibility doesn't even exist in many people's brains. So they don't even think that. That never crosses their mind. Okay, so that was a main player. But eventually, I remembered actually the night that I told him for the first time, and we were at the masjid, and someone was converting to Islam. Someone was converting to Islam at our local masjid.
Yeah.
And I was kind of going through it, and of course I didn't believe at the time, and and I was like, wow, these people are like, I feel bad for them. Like they're about to waste their life. I mean, these Muslims are acting so nice to them and all of this in the beginning, but they really don't know what they're getting into, And I felt like I had to say something. And so when we left that whole celebration, I was with Ibraheem in the car, and I told him, I was like, hey man, by the way, I don't believe anymore. And I just remember seeing the shock in his face. Okay. It was shocking. Right. And I remember at the time he was asking me why, and, like, what is it about the Quran that you think is wrong, and, things like this. So Ibraheem, if you don't mind, maybe just go into like, how did you feel at that time? What were you thinking about? Like, what were the type of emotions that went through your brain that your best friend not to burn out forever?
It was a lot. So, like, before I explain that emotion, I want to like kind of give some background to it. So, like, growing up, I would ask a lot of questions, and like the example you gave, Abdullah, of the canopy, like the hole in the canopy. So whenever I had a hole, I would just like put gum in it, or like just like put like some like not like, I don't know, some not permanent seal. Yeah,
a band-aid.
Tried to patch it up, like little band-aid. So if we keep that canopy image in mind, I kept getting a lot of holes throughout my life, and I would just keep putting band-aid. And like even through like school or in Islamic school, I would ask questions. They tell me like, you shouldn't ask these questions. You shouldn't even try to think about these things, which was hard. Like I would ask like where did, like I just, out of curiosity, I would ask questions like, where did he come from, or what does he look like, or stuff like that, and they would just get like not happy with me. And then when I came here in high school, like I had a wonderful teacher. He would go out of his way to help every single student. He would go out of his way, like so many after hours, to help me out. And then we eventually started having these little debates. And he was an atheist, and I was like Muslim at the time. So we would have these intense conversations, and he would be very respectful, and like he would take the time to talk to me about everything. And no matter how I looked at it, this guy was a good guy. He would go out of his way to help people. He volunteered in like shelters. He
Mm.
just spent every single ounce of his time to help people, but he was atheist. So like that part of me was like, okay, there's something. How can this guy be punished like that badly? Like he's genuinely a good person. Um, and that was a big other hole. Like the way I patched it most of the time was, there was an explanation about how people who weren't presented the religion right were not um, fully responsible, and they would be offered at the end to join the religion when they die. That was the my main to go patch. So moving forward, I started when I started going to college. I took a class, a speech class that kind of taught us how to listen, and it started at the art of listening, and it was basically explained how everyone you listen to in the world has something to offer, and you can learn something from them. And everyone you talk to is an expert at something. That's the quote I remember. So I started getting more into the art of listening, and how, because I learned there's a lot of benefits to it. So I tried to listen more, and then I tried to like do new things, learn new things. Like I started doing like martial arts, just like random things in general. So all these things were like little holes, and then I met a lot more amazing people who were just like good people, and I would tell them about Islam, and they would like it wouldn't add up to them, and I was like, okay, they're gonna turn around eventually. There's something like not adding up here. And then yeah, so like the final blow, moving on to that car ride with Younas, and then he tells me this, and I'm like, wait, no, that's like this can't be true. And like my first emotion was ironically fear, because I started doubting like jinn. And from
Mhm.
what I understood at the time, if you when you doubt jinn, that's when they mess with you. That's when they possess you. That's when they like. And I heard numerous stories growing up about like jinn, how they can like do all kinds of things. So that blow, the first thing that triggered was fear. That because I'm questioning it, I'm like, okay, maybe there's like something wrong. So I took the approach of, okay, I'm gonna become that expert, so I'm able to help and save my friend, because he was my best friend, and I wanted to do anything, like anything to save him. So I took the approach of, I will become that expert. I will, because a lot of the times people would answer, "Oh, you're not an expert. You can't answer these things. You don't have the answer to these because you're not an expert." And I was like, well, if I'm gonna live like this, and my friend is not gonna be part of it, I will become the expert so I can save him and give him all the answers he needs. And yeah, and I was just like that. I remember that ride home. I was so fearful that anything would happen on the ride home, because like I didn't want to die doubting, I guess, or like
Mm.
questioning, or and then slowly I just became more focused on learning the truth, and kind of figure out the expert, quote unquote, to to be able to save my friend. And yeah, that was, and slowly as I learned more and more, it just became harder and harder to like defend. So like I would watch like videos for hours and like read so many things. I read science books and all these things to try to connect everything together. But like with time, the more I knew, the harder it became to answer the questions that Eunice had for me, like basic questions. And then I started having questions of my own, and then it just it just became slightly like there was a point where,
Snowballed.
yeah, snowballed, and then all the band-aid on the canopy just fell apart, and
It
it
burst.
was like it just burst. Like light was coming in from everywhere, and like all these, like I describe them as knots. I've had these little knots that I tried to save on the side in my head for the longest time, and they just all kind of came out. And the example I was telling Eunice is like, it's like, you know, these little puzzles of pictures when you have like that has a hidden word, like it's made with patterns, and you can't see the word, and then you see the word, and when you see that word, it becomes almost impossible to unsee that word. Like
Mm,
it's there, you can see it. Like, so
that's
yeah,
a
that canopy was just,
that's a really good analogy. Like those
yeah,
abstract art pieces where there's something hidden in there and you don't see it at first, but once you see it, you cannot unsee it.
you
Religion is
cannot,
kind of that
you
way.
really can't.
That's a really
So
good analogy.
yeah, so after that the canopy is just shattered after that, pretty much.
Wow.
So yeah, that took that whole process took, I would say, a couple of months. Like there was at one point where I was um like, yeah, right now this is the point I don't believe. It was actually ironically during Ramadan when it started happening. And
Wow.
yeah, and then I remember one time I was like,
Isn't
I don't
Ramadan
believe
where the jinns are supposed to,
the
like,
jinn,
evil, everything is supposed to be
jinns,
taken away? So
yeah,
how can it happen in
which
Ramadan?
is
It's impossible.
exactly, which is the jinn and the shaitans were like chained during these times. So I was like less worried about any of these things. So I kind of went in like too worried, I guess, because
Interesting.
they were chained. Now I can think freely now because they're chained, and I actually chose to like disconnect completely, like what I was learning science wise, and then I started learning like psychology and astronomy, and I actually started studying these things, and like I became fascinated with them, but I felt like I was tied down to think and delve into these concepts because they were against a belief I had, and once that knot was like solved, I was able to fully embrace these things and learn about them. So yeah, like it's just once and then once you jump in like that, you start becoming like very knowledgeable of how different and untrue things you believed were.
How you were trying to make sense of this whole idea of like the heavens and how just the model that Islam presents is very like weird and very outdated seeming. Like you can't make sense of it, you know? And there is a simple answer for that. It's because it is
It is.
outdated. It's made by it's made by
Yeah.
people from, you know, from thousands of years ago who just
Yeah.
didn't understand how the world worked. And one thing I do remember reading the Quran one time, and this was another blow to my faith. I was learning about the stars and learning about the universe and like what the stars are made of. They're made of hydrogen. You know, they burn for billions of years. I mean, all of these scientific things, right? And I came across a verse in the Quran that said something along the lines of, God, like, don't you see that God created the stars so that you can navigate, you know, to pilgrimage? And I'm like, what?
Yeah.
I'm like, what is this? You know, like God created the seas so you can get beautiful jewels and food out of. I mean, it's the whole concept that the universe is made for humans did not sit well with me at all because
Oh yeah.
everything signals like this is not true.
Yeah.
You know,
Like
everything.
this one, right?
Yeah, precisely. Yes. Yeah, exactly. So
I made these balls of glowing gas that are millions of years billions of years old, basically,
yep.
so that you guys can travel in the water.
Some of them have planets of their own. Some of them have planets and worlds of their own that we will never know about or would never know about if it wasn't for science, because the Quran wasn't going to tell
Yeah.
us about them. So the extent of knowledge, if we were just restrained to Quranic knowledge, we would never know what these things were in real life. We would just, the only view of them we would have is that what is described. They're just lights so that you can navigate. You know?
I actually remember asking one of my teachers, like, why do we have stars? Like, what's the point of stars? And
Oh,
the
wow.
answer from my teacher, and he was like a religious teacher. He answered, "It's so when the jinn come out, the stars shoot them back." Like,
Oh,
and that's in the Quran.
yeah.
It roughly basically explains how if a jinn tries to show up, that's what a shooting star is basically. It's a jinn being shot down so he doesn't show up. So yeah, that's
So there's,
that's one of those knots that didn't sit well with me at all.
yeah.
Also, when you start thinking that everything is made for you, you kind of treat it a lot worse, and that's
Mm,
something also that I never liked. Like people truly believe that everything is made for them, so they get to treat it as if it's their own in a way, and like treat
yeah.
it in not in a careful way, if that makes sense.
Climate change. So
There you go.
here's one thing. One of my family members recently went to the country that I was born in, and they're children. They're small. They're like 8 years old or something, right? And when they came back, I asked them. I said, "What was the most memorable thing that you saw?" Right? This is what I asked. This is what I asked her. What was the most memorable thing that you saw? And this is just a kid, right? It's just 8-year-old kid, right? And she told me, she was like, there was trash everywhere. There was trash on the beach. There was plastic bags everywhere. No one cared about littering, right? So she was born here, like raised here. So here they teach you like don't litter, don't throw stuff on the street, things like that. And this concept just doesn't exist in these countries. Okay, and I think it goes back to what Ibrahim was saying. Look, as a human, if you have this mindset that something is made for you, something is infinite, like somehow the earth is not a limited resource, it's just for you to exploit, you tend to do that. And we've been doing that for years. And honestly, look, it's not like the West has been an angel in this. No, the West has recently just realized how much damage is being done. And this is because of science, once again, right? So it's not like religion came and told us that this was bad. No, it's science. We figured out that we're destroying the planet that we live in.
Yeah,
Okay.
the
Um,
way a lot of people, unfortunately, who are religious think about it is, oh, that's just the day of judgment is coming. Like this is the expiration date for the planet. We're just leaving now. Like everything is going down because we're leaving. That's it.
we are fulfilling our own
They're
prophecy.
not constructive about it. Yeah, they're not. They don't want to fix it because
Yeah, you know
they're
what?
not gonna go